Jasper Powrie is an artist who's worked across many different mediums. Jasper made a work once called Exhibition Banner that was for a show at the NAS Stairwell Gallery. He screenshotted the vertical view of his Instagram feed, his account, which had some recent digital drawings that he'd done, and then he printed them lengthways vertically on a large banner. Jasper's video work raises questions about vlogging, social interaction on the web, and social interaction on a personal level of how you view yourself in context with it. Jasper's ceramics work is kind of about the disparity of the spontaneous, improvised decisions he makes whilst constructing the pieces, versus the permanence of the objects themselves because of the firing process. And I think he finds that disparity interesting, of very fleeting, improvised objects that represent a fleeting moment of inspiration, but they're not in one of the most permanent and physical mediums. Jasper has big ideas that haven't yet surfaced in his work. He's been very inspired by Jeff Koons, Jonas Lund, and Simon Denny, to name a few. I think he's been inspired by the scale of their work, how much effort it takes, and he's sort of had a realization that a lot of his work is founded on a spontaneous, quick, sort of low effort approach, and now he's interested in challenging himself to put more effort into making stuff. Jasper once made a work which is kind of hard to pin down to one medium because it's sort of part performance, part sculpture, but he had his iPhone 4 blue tacked to a wall in a gallery, and then he and me and him both texted the phone non-stop for the hour length of this short exhibition. I think it was a lunchtime exhibition at NAS, so it was only open for an hour. So we texted the phone non-stop, both of us, so that the phone kept vibrating up against the wall. And I thought this was interesting. If I recall correctly, he described one of his favorite parts of the work being that the rhythm at which the phone vibrated was constantly changing subtly according to the phone's, just the pure ability of the phone, of the just based on the limitations of the phone's hardware to receive all of the texts. Sometimes I'd send a few and they wouldn't go through, and then they'd all go through at once. I think Jasper is open to any medium. I think he could work in any medium because he has a holistic view of creative practice, and I think he has an anti-romantic view. That is to say, I think he does not romanticize the creative process as being an act of genius, but simply as just playing with something. But I think that's partly because he has a very strong knack for creating things all the time, which is rare among people. I think he views his own practice as like, well, this is all I do all the time. This is, what I do, what I choose to do with my time. So he feels like maybe, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I think he doesn't view it as being that special necessarily. I'm sure he probably does with some work. I think that's what he feels about the more high effort work he's working on. To clarify what I just said, he talks a lot about just he talks about inspiration not coming from some kind of mysterious spiritual source, but rather it's just a constant reflection of the culture that we live in. Like, we basically just regurgitate a lot of what we see and what we like out of what we see. And I think he's very transparent about that, and he embraces that holistically. And I think he's skeptical about people that try to create some kind of mystery about where their ideas for their work comes from. I think he's very realistic about the fact that it just comes from art you see, but also not just art, but visual graphics that you see on the street in shop signs and in commercials, but also not specifically graphic things, but just ways of life that you're exposed to, and how that will politically be reflected through your work. Maybe the least known kind of work of his among his friends and colleagues and such, this is just a guess, but I would guess it's his writing. He's a really good writer. His style recently, in the past 6 months or so, has been very situational writing. Specific situations he's been in and then he's remembered, and then he just writes about them. So they're basically stories of his life. But it's just a really intriguing kind of style to the writing. That's really vague, but the writing is at times vague and at times super specific, and there's just a flavor to it. I don't know anywhere near enough about literary theory to unpack what he's doing exactly. I think he just has a vague notion in his head of the effect he wants the writing to have, and then he's able to realize that. He's able to realize that just by writing. And I think his music is a similar process, where he's not thinking about a theoretical level, or he's not necessarily hearing a specific sound in his head and then realizing it through a computer or through an instrument. I think he's hearing a general, a more ephemeral vibe, so to speak, for lack of a better term. And then he experiments with ways of realizing that. I guess that applies more to his electronic music though. His improvising is a whole other thing, I think. I think Jasper thinks very deeply and profoundly about lots of aspects of our culture, of his immediate surroundings. I think he thinks a lot about visual culture, commercial, I guess specifically commercial visual culture in shop fronts and on street signs and such, where a specific graphic is meant to communicate a certain thing. I think he's very analytical about all kinds of media he consumes. And I think he's sort of detached enough to be able to zoom out on what's going on around him and understand it on a deeper level. Jasper's a modern media man. He's a man of modern media. He embraces the contemporary and the new. He wholeheartedly embraces new developments in technology and media and such. I think basically because they're inevitable directions that everything's going in, and he thinks like I think he said to me once, it's kind of pointless to resist those changes, but not in a defeatist way. He's kind of like this, it's, it is an exciting and amazing kind of time in technology, so why not embrace it, and embrace it like through your life and through your art. And this is another thing, this is another big concept that relates to a lot of his practice, including Waterfield, is like producer, consumer, becoming the one thing. Or like, the average consumer also contributing, being a producer of some kind. And so I guess, when we make these videos where we're watching lots of YouTube videos and stuff, kind of generating new content from existing content, it directly relates to that phenomenon that life now is just kind of consuming swathes of data, consuming more data than, attempting to consume much more data than you can feasibly absorb in a meaningful way. And that's kind of projecting my own view on it, because that's something that because it's a collaborative project. I'm not really 100% sure how he thinks about it, but I think when I've said that kind of thing, he agrees. They're about the feed. I think Jasper's done some amazing stuff in his life, and will continue to do amazing stuff, and it'll just keep getting, I feel like he's trending towards more ambition in his projects, so I think that'll yield some interesting results.